Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating blueprint of human behavior, leadership, and societal structure, all found right in biblical texts. We're actually going to go well beyond just reading isolated verses today to explore a complete, interconnected system. It's a system that suggests our most private, internal posture directly dictates our external impact on our families, our cities, and ultimately our nations. It's a profound cause and effect relationship, and as you'll see, the evidence we've lined up makes it incredibly clear. So, let's dive right in. Here's exactly how we're going to break this all down today. First, we'll look at the foundation of faithfulness. Second, the heart and the spirit. Third, the danger of partial obedience. Fourth, rejecting worldly distractions. And finally, number 5, leadership, love, and duty. All right, starting with section 1, the foundation of faithfulness. So the texts we're analyzing don't actually start with human effort at all. Instead, they anchor all human behavior in a divine covenant. Deuteronomy 7:9 establishes this on a truly massive scale. It says, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments." This sets a really important baseline. Faithfulness isn't just some short-term contract. It's a generational bedrock. It's literally continuous from one generation to the next. The source material essentially argues that because the divine is flawlessly faithful, human faithfulness has to mirror that exact same standard. That is the starting line from which absolutely everything else flows. And setting that standard creates a sort of cascading effect. Think of it almost like a waterfall. The argument here is that if a person is unfaithful at the very highest level, meaning to God, they simply cannot be truly faithful in their everyday worldly duties. Faithfulness flows downstream, right? From God to your family to your daily duties and ultimately to one another. Conversely, if that top link is broken, the whole cascade turns negative. In fact, the text warns that this world is full of unfaithfulness precisely because that primary connection is severed. You simply cannot have the downstream benefits without maintaining that upstream source. Moving on to section 2, the heart and the spirit. Okay, so moving from that macro idea of the covenant down to the absolute micro level, we really have to look at the internal condition of the individual. Maintaining that cascading faithfulness we just talked about, well, it isn't just about trying really hard. It actually requires a complete internal transformation. Psalms 51:10 says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." I want you to notice the key word there, create. It absolutely implies a total reliance on the divine presence as the main prerequisite for a steadfast spirit. You just can't manufacture a pure heart on your own. It has to be granted to you. And without that steadfast spirit, keeping up with those downstream blessings and faithfulness, it's pretty much impossible. The texts actually present a very binary view of our internal state. On one hand, there's the promise found in John 16:13 regarding the spirit of truth, a spirit that guides you into all truth and speaks what it hears. But on the flip side, there is a severe warning that departing from the Lord creates a spiritual void. The source material strongly suggests that human beings are never truly empty. If you depart from the divine presence, that void is going to be filled by something else, which is often characterized as evil spirits taking hold. It's a really powerful reminder that our internal posture is always being influenced by one source or the other. Which brings us to section 3, the danger of partial obedience. So what actually happens when these internal spiritual principles are compromised in real historical action? Well, let's look at the story of King Saul. His tragic thesis is incredibly simple. Saul partially obeyed the Lord. Now, to our modern ears, partial obedience kind of sounds like a passing grade, right? Like, hey, you did most of the work. But the source text takes a radically different view. In this framework, partial obedience is full disobedience. There's literally no middle ground. And this is exactly where the disconnect happens. From Saul's very human perspective, he thought he was acting completely reasonably. He was told to destroy everything in battle, but he decided to spare the best of the animals, claiming he did it so he could sacrifice them to the Lord later. But from the divine perspective, the instruction required total compliance. Because Saul decided to substitute his own human logic for the divine command, it was categorized as complete disobedience, which ultimately resulted in his total rejection as king. 1 Samuel 15:17 diagnoses the exact moment of failure. It asks, "When thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel?" The localized translation beautifully captures this poignant reflection. The text makes it crystal clear. A leader fails the exact moment they become big in their own eyes. When Saul viewed himself as small, he relied on God. When he started viewing himself as large and important, well, he relied on his own reasoning, and that led directly to his downfall. The source actually maps out this tragic anatomy of distractions step by step. First, promotion distracts the individual. You get a little power, and suddenly you lose focus. Consequently, step 2, you become big in your own eyes. This leads to step 3, chasing worldly things, what the text metaphorically refers to earlier in Saul's story as chasing donkeys instead of seeking God. And ultimately, this results in a steady, tragic departure from the Lord until his word and guidance cease entirely. It really is a chillingly logical decay of a leader's spiritual integrity.
That takes us to Section 4, Rejecting Worldly Distractions.
This decay we just talked about leads perfectly into our next point. The texts don't just warn against internal pride, they actively and strictly forbid turning to external, worldly sources of spiritual guidance when things start going wrong. Deuteronomy 18 lays down a super hard line against detestable practices. We're talking about practicing sorcery, divination, and relying on charmers and enchanters. The localized text emphasizes just how deeply forbidden these practices were, saying they should absolutely not be found among the people, period. You must rely solely on the divine covenant and nothing else. Now, we see the ultimate successful counterexample to Saul in the figure of Abraham. Abraham showed absolute, unquestioning trust in the Lord. In Genesis 14:22, he actually raises his hand and swears an oath exclusively to God Most High, refusing to take even a single thread from a worldly king. Why? Because of a brutal underlying warning in these texts. If you trust the world, it will loot you. Abraham's exclusive trust protected him from the compromises and the inevitable looting of the world.
And finally, Section 5, Leadership, Love, and Duty.
Let's zoom back out to the macro level for a second. How do all these very internal choices actually affect our communities and our nations? Well, it translates fundamentally into how we treat each other. Romans 13:8 says, "Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." The localized translation completely reinforces this absolute directive. This framing elevates the whole concept of mutual love far, far above any societal, transactional, or financial debt. If you are faithful to God, as we saw in that very first cascade, you are faithful to one another. Love essentially becomes the ultimate duty, the absolute fulfillment of the law. And this is exactly why all of this matters on such a massive scale. The source text directly links the internal faithfulness of individuals to the structural integrity of entire societies. Look at Moses, for example. Hebrews notes he was faithful as a servant in all God's house, holding unswervingly to hope. That personal, quiet faithfulness has a giant macro impact. The texts argue forcefully that the character of a city depends entirely on its leaders. The character of a state depends on its leaders. The character of a nation depends on its leaders. If the leaders are big in their own eyes, if they rely on worldly distractions, the nation is going to crumble. But if they have a steadfast spirit and own nothing but love, the nation thrives. So, we've traced the arc from the divine covenant all the way to the fate of nations. But at the end of the day, the source material leaves us looking right in the mirror. It forces every single one of us to ask one profound, lingering question: what spirit possesses me? Ask yourself, are you driven by the spirit of truth and a pure heart, or have worldly distractions taken hold? It is a truly brilliant daily metric for our own lives, determining not just our own fate, but the character of the world we are all building around us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really encourage you to keep asking yourself that question.